All right, what is up everyone? This is Soul with another video, and today I'm going to show you folks how to make something like this. Okay, it's not going to be literally like this. I'm going to teach you how to make something like that. I'll teach you like the tools and the methods and the thought process on how to make basically a 3D sort of sculpture using whatever objects you feel like using to eventually create a certain kind of a picture or photo when you look at it from a certain perspective, hence this thing right here as an example. It was actually not that hard to do, and so I'm just going to go through again like the tools and everything that went into this process. So if you don't mind, like the video, subscribe for more stuff. I'm kind of ripping this one, so I'm going to be a bit ranty. Please forgive me if if my speech is like jumping around all over the place. But first thing you want to have is just like an idea of what you want to do. Now you can see like right here the kind of perspective point comes from this spot in the corner of a room. Now you can pretty much do whatever you like. I think one thing that I woulda, coulda, shoulda done is to like maybe make something where I'm here in the middle, and then when I go around, maybe I'll see like a picture. And what would be really cool is if I can go like in multiple directions. You know, if I'm looking like here and then in some other direction, then I can see like multiple pictures. That could be kind of cool if I wanted to make some sort of like, you know, outdoor constellation here in the stars. And otherwise, before you go into that shot, you just see you just see a bunch of these filigree lights that are scattered all over the place. But instead I went with this with mostly an experiment, and then from there you folks who are highly creative can make up your own sort of thing. So let's first start off with, well, I guess like what kind of thing do you want to create in the sky? So the first thing is you want to at least decide on a fairly simple sort of pattern or picture, like something that is using like very simple lines, because at least with this exercise, we're just using like a very simple object like these filigree lights right over here. And these are very cheap too. So you can just buy a whole bunch of these. I'm using, I believe, 1,157 of these things, which you don't have to do yourself. You can probably pull off a complete picture with considerably fewer of these, especially if you want to pull off something that might be outdoors. That could be really cool too. With only a budget of $250 at the moment, you would need to be pretty inventive, or you need to make a pretty simple pattern in order to pull off this sort of effect. Now, as for tools or things to help you out, the method of creating something like this is to basically have like a stencil or a pattern to work with, and then you just place objects on top of it, or at least in that area, so you can make this work. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, it doesn't really matter where I sit, but I'll just sit here for the heck of it. And I'm going to take my OBS, my video capture software, and I'll put it right up here on screen. It's going to look kind of funny. So what we have here is the ability to capture your screen. And this is going to be pretty important if you want to create this sort of stencil effect. Now, what you can do, and what I did, was take the picture that I wanted to like trace over with decor, and I just put it on top of the screen right here. So here I'm using this center screen here to capture my entire desktop, so that way you can see it here on screen. And then from there, I put this stencil on top of that. So boom, there we go. So now we have this picture that we will eventually like trace over, like, okay, whoop-de-doo. So I'm gonna put that aside for now. Now, it's very important that, again, we're trying to create this sort of image based on a very set perspective. You know, we're right there sitting on that chair, and we actually have the camera zoomed in to a certain point. So like if I'm here and if I zoom the camera out, you can kind of see the picture starts to distort a little bit. Sorry, let me take the stencil thing away. You can see it starts to distort until I move all the way in. So you also need to kind of set up how the perspective is going to look. And ideally you want to use as few or like as easy conditions as possible. So there are a couple of, I guess, what I'm going to call anchors that you're setting up. One is the position of the chair. So you want to have it positioned in like this exact, you know, in a certain spot. You never want it to move. If you move it even by like one grid pixel thingamajig, then it's going to kind of mess up the perspective. So let me go ahead and put that thing back before I forget, because I'll definitely do that. And let me do a quick sanity check, make sure we're good. Okay, and then we're good. And then notice again, we're zoomed all the way in here. And that's going to be important later, as I'll as I'll explain in just a little bit. So for the sake of getting the positioning, we're going to be right here. We're all the way zoomed in. And then the last thing that we want to do is actually lock the camera in place. So what we're trying to do here, I'm going to put the stencil back on. So if we're moving the camera around, obviously we're going to like screw up. And so we want to make sure that we don't move the camera at all, if possible. But there are going to be periods where we do need to move the camera because we need to buy more lights, or because I fat fingered and I suddenly moved, I moved the picture. Oh no. So what we also need to do here, let me turn this thing back off. What we need to do as well, we need to set up a fixed camera position. So this is something you don't need any add-ons or anything crazy like that. We just go into key bindings and into camera, and there should be like some defaults. There should be some defaults here. I don't know what they are. But in this case, we're going to be pretty narrow with the example, and we're going to set up a very specific camera positioning based on where we are. So right now I have it set to number 9, and to program it, I have a control number 9 over on my keyboard. So what I did was I sat here, on this chair, I zoomed all the way in, and then once I got, the camera where I want it to be, which happened to be like right here or so, then I hit that program button. And so now if I happen to be off screen, or, if I'm like this, I just need to hit that 9 button like once and then twice again. And now let me turn the stencil back on. Here we go. So this is a way to kind of keep things in place as we're doing the actual creation of this picture. And whenever we mess up, or whenever we're away from the keyboard or whatever, we can go back to this position here. I want to go back to the chair really quick too. The chair is very important. You want to use just one chair. That's going to be very important, but also you want to consider the kind of character that you're using. So I happen to make this sculpture using a Blood Elf character, or Blood Elf model, and it happened to also work with other characters that I checked out. I checked out humans, I checked out Tauren as well, to make sure that, if it's a human or a Tauren that happens to be sitting in this chair, they'll be able to see this kind of pictures when they have the camera totally zoomed in. Let me turn this thing back off again. I noticed on shorter characters, on dwarves and Vulpera, the picture was distorted. It just didn't look right, and I guess it's because for whatever reason, when you're zoomed in, your center of gravity is, your camera center is just lower because they're just shorter characters. So that's kind of it for the setup. Like I said, you just want to make sure you have a camera position that you like. From there, you take your stencil, you put it onto your OBS or your capture software. And also very important, once you have this thing set up, you want to lock it as well. Because if this thing happens to move as well, then you're kind of screwed, and then you'll have to like reposition and then redo your sculpture setup all over again. And once you have that set up, you're pretty much good to go. You're ready to start assembling, but there are some considerations that you want to make. So I'm going to pan back over here so you can see like the whole spread of the lights. It's really wide, and so that does create a certain effect where you can create, there's like I can kind of make curved lines, or sort of, it looks like the strokes, they look kind of convincing, and that helps because with smaller lights or a bigger perspective, you're able to create what's basically a higher resolution image if you wanted to do that. Now, that's not necessary. You can work with a much smaller space if you want to. And so let's go ahead and get to the actual assembly of this thing. So I'm not going to start from scratch. I'm just going to kind of use this as an example. So we're going to turn the stencil on. I'm going to set the camera. As soon as I go back in game, set the camera. And then I happen to have like a couple of these lights here that are kind of like hanging out. And so all that I would do, I would just take these lights, and I would use the advanced mode and just position them to where they need to be 1,000 times, or, as many times as you feel like you need to do. And as you're doing this, you start filling that space, and you can't really see this on screen, but but you're not really looking at the game screen necessarily. You're looking at your capture software, and then you're watching as these objects move into position and start filling out the spot. So if you want, you can take the stencil and you can kind of make it semi-transparent if you want to go into a video, like Photoshop or some sort of editing software to either make the stencil semi-transparent, or if you want to make it like hollow, if you just want to have like lines and then you just kind of fill in the lines with, whatever objects that you're using, that's fine too. Now, when it does come time to start assembling whatever your structure is, I'm going to go back here once again. You want to consider just how big of a resolution you want to work with, or just like kind of how big of a spread do you want to have here? Because when you're buying a whole bunch of these lights, you can decide, okay, I'm going to use like the entire room. And so I'm going to use the entire room. Or you might want to just work with a narrow area. So let's use this grid as kind of a guideline. You can't just decide, hey, I'm just going to place all sorts of filigree lights along this area here. So that way you effectively limit the space that all these lights are going to be taken up, because understandably you might have a lot more stuff inside your house, or you want to work with a smaller budget, so you don't want to work with like really, really tiny lights that are all the way back here. Like I did a pretty extreme thing here where all of these lights are brought down to 20% of their size. So each time I threw one down, I threw down like a whole pile of these things, and then I sized them all down to 20%. And then from there, I would go back here. Once that's done, I would make sure I sit, so make sure that my angle is okay, so that way the position's all right. I'll go back to edit mode, and then I'll take all this whole pile of lights that are here and just start putting them into position. And so I spent, I'd say like 4 hours of total work time putting all these things together and going back into town, or switching to a character to buy more lights, and then coming back here to place them back up. And then when I felt satisfied, then I felt satisfied, and like that was it. And so this is how I got this thing. Of course, again, you can do like whatever you want, and I do advise taking time to plan exactly just how much space you want to take for these sorts of structures, because these are solid structures. You can't just like walk through them or anything. They will like obstruct your movements if you're trying to do that. So my advice would be when the time comes, or at least, heck, you can just try this as an exercise. Try setting something up like towards the middle of a room, preferably at a higher elevation. And then from there, create a, here, let me just go ahead and throw down like any old chair here really quick. I just want to sit. There we go. So set up your perspective by zooming all the way in, and then from there, choose a couple of shots, and then from there use the save button or use these camera functions. Let me go back to this one more time just in case we're forgetting here. Use the save view to program the positioning of where you want the camera to go, and then you would use just the number pad, just as an example keybind, to set it to that. So sit down, go ahead and position yourself, zoom all the way in, save it, and then when you're ready, just use the hotkey to go back to whatever that is. Now, I also want to point out a flaw that I did with my design. So you can see right down here, like the lower swish of the Y here, it's kind of against the ground. And if I turn here, let me position this back in, turn the stencil back on, you can kind of see here, like, the lights are kind of sticking out a little bit. It's because I couldn't make the lights any smaller. And that's because from the perspective of this, I can't make them any smaller. Because if I try to, I have lights that are like really far back there, or they're otherwise sunk into the ground. So I made a flaw here, and I basically made the stencil too low, where I could have set it maybe a little bit higher. So if it was up here, then it would have been totally fine. I would have been able to have a little bit more leeway of having this look a bit more convincing, but it's fine. But it's something that you want to be careful of when you're setting the perspectives. You want to give yourself as much room, as much open space as possible when you're creating this object. And I think that about covers it. By the way, the filigree lights are cheap. They're only about 10 Dragon Isle supplies, so I spent about 10,000 of that stuff. I don't know how easy it is to get that stuff these days, but it wasn't so bad. But you can use like any number of things. It's just easiest to use something like this. The first time I tried this, actually, I tried using the fell candles, and that was a disaster because of the way that they're shaped, because you would need to like rotate them in a certain way. And so I ended up taking like a couple hundred of those candles, trying to point it at this chair, and it was just a big disaster. You're better off using like a symmetrical object, a round object like this, and then you'll be just fine. So if you have any questions, like, hey, why are you crazy? Feel free to leave them in the comment below, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for the next experiment maybe. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.